Good morning, everyone, and welcome to OLC4O Term 1B. I'm your instructor, Mike Laverty. Thanks for tuning in today. Today is November 21st, 2022, and we are on class number 5. We are still on Unit 1, but we are moving into Lesson 2 today. Last week, we finished up Lesson 1, and today we're moving ahead with Lesson 2. We'll be talking about assignments 6, 7, and 8. So we're in week 2. There will be no classes from December 26th to January 5th. So that's our holiday. That's the holiday break where there will be no broadcasts for those 2 weeks. But we still have 9 weeks in total. Last day of class is January 26th, 2023. For those of you who are taking this course through an independent learner, those dates don't really apply to you, but if you're registered in a specific term, then those dates are really important. And it's important for the independent learners to stay on schedule. So the way we've broken down one of these terms, and I give you reminders along the way on where you should be in the assignments, should give you a timeline of where you should be if you're doing this course on your own pace. So this is how you watch and listen live by phoning into the studio, tuning into the radio, tuning into Bell ExpressVu channel 972, or logging on to Zoom. So if you just put that Zoom link into your browser, it'll bring you right to the meeting. And I will post these on Facebook. They are in the study material. You can get them by talking to your DEC, by visiting or phoning your local learning center to get that information, or by talking to me. If you put Laverty Wassa in the search bar in YouTube, you will find my YouTube channel. And when you go to my YouTube channel, you can go to the home page, look at all the videos, and I would suggest doing this. Go to the playlist, and when you go to the playlist, you will see all the courses that I teach at Wassa, and you will see this one right here, OLC4O Term 1B. And I put all of the classes in playlists. As I get more lessons, I'll start to divide the playlists up into lessons and units, but for now they're all just in one playlist. But as I get more content, I'll start to separate it out for you. You need to start sending me work. So you can do that in many ways, by talking to your DC, scanning it, emailing it, sending it yourself to that email address and CC it to me. That's my email is on the next slide. I'll show you. If you can fax pages, again, that's a toll-free. That fax line's not going to cost you anything. And you can take photos with your phone and email them to me or send them to me on Messenger. That's how you get in touch with me. I'm very responsive with this email address. You can find me on Facebook, Laverty Wassa. You can phone the office, and you've got a free long-distance number to phone me. This is when you want to call me, Monday through Friday. I'm at my desk from 9 till 3. And here's your next step. So, number 1, you need to make contact with me and your other Wassa teachers. You should be reading up to about the first 34 pages of Unit 1 of OLC4O. These pages cover assignments 1 through 9. So that's just reading them. So read that information. And then in terms of actually finishing the assignments, everybody works at their own pace, but it's important to not fall too far behind. So you should be completing or have completed assignments 1 through 5 at this point, or at least started them. You know, got a rough draft done of assignments 1, 2, and 5. That's your general timeline. So here we are. Here's today's lessons. We will do the words of the day. We'll look at today's headline. We're going to look at punctuation. So I mentioned this last week that instead of doing an entire class on punctuation, or an entire class on the 9 parts of speech. For the next couple of weeks, at least every day, I'm going to look at one. So one piece of punctuation we'll do is a colon. And colons are, of course, the 2 dots like that. The semi, which means half, right, or part. The semicolon is like that. And then this one's the colon. And we'll look at one part of speech today. We'll look at pronouns. Then we're going to talk about Unit 1, Lesson 2, assignments 6, 7, and 8, all of which deal with the novel Jimmy Comes Home. So the majority of today's class is going to be discussing the novel Jimmy Comes Home, and more specifically, we're going to be talking about how do we answer questions about that text. So we're going to use that word text a lot today, and a text can be a lot of things. A text can be an actual text that you send to somebody on your phone. A text is a short story, it's a poem, it's a novel. So it's when we're talking about the text, we're talking about how do we answer questions about it in a meaningful way that, makes connections with our own lives. So our learning goals are to review the 9 parts of speech, learn the definition of a pronoun. We will review the proper use of a colon, and we're going to learn about the rap rock method. So it sounds like a genre of music, but it's a method for answering questions about a text. So it's an acronym. Every letter in that word stands for something, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. And if we're successful, we will understand the definition of a pronoun. We will learn how to use a colon properly, and we will use the rap rock method to complete an assignment from Lesson 2. So if you watch this lesson, and if you can do these 3 things, then that's success. So it's important to find success every day in our lives. It's important to celebrate the big things in our lives, like finishing a chorus or getting our high school diploma, like the big things in life. But to get the big things in life, you got to do a whole bunch of little things. And I think it's really important to celebrate those little things. So if you can do those 3 things, that's a success. And you will build on this to become a better writer, a better reader, and to be successful in this course. So we're working through the 7 grandfather teachings. We did love, we did respect, bravery, wisdom, and now today we're going to be doing honesty. So my aunt is a adult educator just like myself, and one of her students, this guy right here, Henry, he designed these amazing pictures, right? And he made them for her, and then she hung them up in her office, and then she is in the process of retiring, and she gave them to me. So now they're up in my office, and I took photos of them, and I like to share them with you in these classes. So this grandfather teaching is honesty. And again, I do not speak Ojibwe, Anishinaabemowin. I'm trying to learn lots more about it. So, send me an email if I'm not pronouncing these things right. I'm trying to do my research. But Gaywakwad Diziwin, which is honesty, and the teaching is honesty in facing a situation, is to be brave. So a little further explanation there is to live correctly and with virtue, and this is commonly referred to as honesty. So you've got the word broken down into its 3 components: correctly, straightly, rightly, he or she lives, and of course that prefix. Remember that prefix here. A prefix is how a word ends, right? So that's the end of the word. So it tells us, so honesty is a way for us to live correctly and rightly. Represented by the raven or the Sabe, Sasquatch, and they both understand who they are and how to walk in their life. And again, I'm getting all of this from our Partners in Education, 7 Generations Education Institute. Looking at that word in English, I chose, so honesty is a noun, it's a thing. I chose to look at the word honest, which is an adjective. It describes usually a person, but it can also describe their actions. You know, you can do an honest thing, or you can be an honest person. So these definitions I got from dictionary.com, which is a great website, right? Dictionary.com is amazing. It is free. It is out there for everybody to use. And dictionary.com gives us 3 definitions. It gives us way more than 3, but I just chose these 3. So to be honest is to be free of deceit, truthful and sincere, morally correct or virtuous, fairly earned, especially through hard work. All right, so again, we've got virtue. There are the 7 grandfather teachings. There's also like a Christian equivalency, or a similar kind of belief system in Christianity where you have the 7 virtues. So to live correct, to live virtuously, is to live according to like really high ideals. They're things you should be striving towards. You may not do them all the time, but they're things that you should be trying to do. Here's a quote from James E. Faust. Honesty is more than not lying. It is truth-telling, truth-speaking, truth-living, and truth-loving. And I love that. I love that idea of truth living. So honesty is when you live the truth. And interestingly enough, you know, I love words and the history of words. So the Romans, ancient Romans, they worshipped a god named Onos or Honos. I'm not sure how they pronounce that, but he was the personification of honor, particularly military honor. So when you personify something, when you're the personification of it, then you're a person that, you know, like you are that thing. If you personify honor, then you live so honorously that you just become honor. So they worship this god named Onos or Honos, and he was the god of honor. And then that's how we got the word. So a lot of words in English go back to the ancient Romans, the ancient Greeks. They go back thousands of years. And we may forget where they come from, but they have those ancient roots. Now, we're going to work on today's piece of punctuation. So we had the colon, right? So depending on what text or what font or typeface you're using, a colon's going to be, you know, 2 dots, might be 2 little squares, but that's how it looks, right? It's the 2 dots on one on top of each other. And what they're used for is they introduce lists, ideas, texts, they give emphasis, or they present dialogue. The colon tells the reader, so when you're reading a book and you see a colon, you could say in your mind, for example, or as follows, or thus, or here it is. That's what it's doing. It's a way to introduce ideas. And there's a great book on the market called Eats, Shoots, and Leaves. And the title of the book is a joke. It's about a panda who walks into a bar. He eats, shoots, and leaves. Maybe I'll incorporate that into a future lesson. It's a great book. If you don't put the comma in the right place, he eats, he shoots people, and he leaves. But if you put the comma in the right place, the panda eats, shoots, that's what he eats, and leaves, like the actual like food or plant leaves. But anyways, it's a great book, and it teaches us how to use punctuation. And in that book, they talk about how punctuation are kind of like traffic signs. And when you see a period, that's a stop sign. That means you slow the car down completely before you move on. A colon is kind of like a comma, where you kind of like half pause. It's like when you go to a stop sign and you just ease up on the brake, but you don't come to a complete stop, and then you go, sort of like that. So here's an example. The mechanic gave us 2 options to fix the car. Colon. Have it repaired, have it ready overnight for $200 or wait until the next week for 100. Right? So the colon is like he gave us two options. Here they are. So that's when it introduces an idea or a list. In this case, the list has two things. The director walked onto the stage and made an announcement. We only have 2 days before the show and we are not ready. So in this case, the colon is introducing a comma. So somebody walked on stage and this is what they said. So the colon in this case right here is like here it is, or this is what they said, or get ready for it. Now what I've done is I've presented that with the quotation marks, and we're gonna delve into this in a second. Okay, so this quotation mark brackets off the whole quote, and the single quotation marks block off what the director said. And more on that in a second, but quotation marks are another form of punctuation that we need to use correctly. Colons are also used to join two independent clauses that are directly related. And this job is more commonly done by the semicolon. So remember, clauses. A clause is the very important concept to understand. That's the building block. The building block of a sentence. We cannot build sentences without clauses. Independent clauses are clauses that can stand alone as their own sentence. So they're grammatically correct if they stand alone by themselves. But as an author, as a writer, you can make a decision to join them together. So you can join them with a semicolon, or you can join them with a conjunction, which is a joining word. A word like and, but, yes, so, however, words like that. So that's one of the most confusing parts about learning English, learning a lot of language. There's a lot of rules, but there's also like many ways to do the same thing. So on one hand, that's a negative because you have to learn a lot of rules, but on a positive note, that's a good thing because once you learn the rules, it gives you more options as a writer. But step one is really important. Learn the rules. Step two, learn how to use them. And maybe even break them a little bit once you get really advanced, right? But you have to learn the rules. Here's some examples. So, a dolphin is not a fish, colon. It is a warm-blooded mammal. So, I see, independent clause. I see, independent clause. This is a complete sentence. This is a complete sentence. They are joined together with the punctuation, the colon. You can also do it with a semicolon. Number one and number two are basically the same sentence. So they do the same function. Option three, I can write them as two different sentences. Options 1, 2, and 3 have all the same words, different punctuation, right? But they all mean the same thing. They're all different ways you can write a sentence. Now, sentence 4 and 5, I just included for your reference. So I saw many underwater mammals on my vacation, colon. So remember the colon is like, and they were, and here's my list, dolphins, sea lions, and walruses. Many people mistake dolphins for fish. Semicolon, however, comma, they are warm-blooded mammals. And so when you use a word like however, and again, it's sort of like, I heard one writer kind of compare it to like Lego pieces, or, there's just certain little pieces that have to be fit together in a certain way to build a sentence. And when we build a sentence, if we use the semicolon and we follow the semicolon with a word like however, until, or a word like that, then the comma comes after it. So many people mistake dolphins for fish. However, they are warm-blooded mammals, right? So that's how you build a sentence, and that's how you use punctuation to build a sentence correctly. And we'll get more on that, but that's, you know, the main way to use the colon, number one point, is to introduce a list. Probably the most frequently way people misuse the colon is when the colon separates a noun from its verb, when you separate a verb from its object, or when you separate a subject from its predicate, okay? So let's just break down some of those words, okay? So we know that verbs are action words. We know that the subject is, this is what, remember, a subject is what the sentence is about. So remember, we know what these things are because we use language every day. We may not know the word for it, but that's why we're here. So the subject is what the sentence is about. The predicate is what is said about the subject, or what the subject does. So if I say the boy kicked the ball, the boy is the subject. He's what the sentence is about. The object is what he's acting on, the ball in this case, right? So sometimes a sentence has a subject, an object, and a verb, right? It's got a subject, it's got a predicate, what they do, and the object is what they're doing it to, or sometimes what is done to them, right? So maybe the boy was picked on by another boy at school, right? But in that case, the boy is still the subject, but you know, something is picking on him, right? So all that just to say that we don't separate the colon from its verb, from its objects. And so an easy way to remember that is everything that comes before the colon should basically be a sentence that could stand on its own. So we don't say, when I graduate, I want to go to Rome, Israel, and Egypt. We say, after I graduate, I hope to visit 3 places. Rome, Israel. Well, I spelled Israel wrong. That's Israel. Should be Israel. I want to visit Rome, Israel, and Egypt, okay? So that's the proper way to set up a list, right? You shouldn't have a word like to in between there. It should be, I want to visit 3 places. And there you go. There's your 3 places. All right, here's today's headline. So we are still talking about unfortunately, we're still talking about the war in the Ukraine. So in this headline, it reads, Ukraine forces push further into Kharkiv region as Russia scatters in chaotic retreat. There's my headline right there. I've color-coded all of the words. Nouns are in blue. Verbs are in green. Adverbs are in purple. Adjectives are in orange. Okay, so there they are. Prepositions are in red. Every word that we use in a sentence is going to be identified with one of the 9 parts of speech. So Ukraine. So what we could do is we could combine these two, Ukraine forces, and that's what we could call a noun phrase. We can use them together. But that's like, they're going to be used together. So, so the Ukraine forces, what did they do? They pushed further, okay? So adverbs, right there in the title, an adverb modifies a verb. It adds to a verb. So that's one way to remember that, right? An adverb adds to a verb. So this adverb is modifying this verb. So these soldiers, they pushed, but where did they push? They pushed further. It tells me how they pushed. In is a preposition. Prepositions are relationship words. They tell us when something happened. They tell us where something happened. In this case, it's where. They pushed into the Kharkiv region, which is another noun phrase. So sometimes 2 or 3 or even 4 words combine and they basically just become one noun. but the Kharkiv region is like one place in the world. It takes two words to tell us that. It'd be like saying Northwestern Ontario, right? You need two words to say it, but it's one place. As is a conjunction. It's a combining word. Russia is a noun. It's a place. Scatters, great word, is a verb. In, preposition. And then adjectives. Remember, adverbs modify verbs. Adjectives modify nouns. So they always come in pairs, right? I can't use the word chaotic unless I have a word that describes what is chaotic, right? In this case, it's retreat. So you can retreat in an orderly way. You know, if you're in the military, if you're in a war zone, and you feel that your position is vulnerable, and you need to pull the troops back to a safer spot, you can do that in an orderly, planned way. In this case, it wasn't. It was a chaotic retreat. So the word chaotic is an adjective that modifies that word retreat. It tells me what kind of a retreat it was. So there's certain kind of words that have to be used with other words. And then this word as, right? It's a that color coding should be wrong, but that's a conjunction. Conjunction. It's a combining word. Okay? Ukraine forces push further in Kharkiv region. That's a complete sentence. Russia scatters in chaotic retreat. That's a sentence, right? You see what I mean? So this is a sentence. That's clause 1. That's clause 2, right? If we look at number 1, my subject is Ukraine. My predicate is they push further in. So Ukraine is the subject. Push is what they did. Go to the bottom. Russia is my subject. So number 1 and number 2, they're both independent clauses. They are combined when I use this word as right here. So the as is the conjunction that combines 1 and 2. And that is how we build a sentence. All right, let's look at today's part of speech. We're looking at pronouns, okay? So a pronoun stands in place for a noun, or it gives us more information about a noun. The noun that the pronoun stands in place for is called the antecedent, okay? So ante is a word that means before, right? So it stands in place. And that's why it's before, right? So you hear the noun first, and then you hear the pronoun, okay? And it stands in place. So a lot of people sometimes talk about this in their email signature, like my name is Mike, my pronouns are he, him, right? Some people don't go by he or she, they go by they. They don't identify with a gender. That's their pronouns, so they've chosen their pronouns. So the noun is them, their full name, and the pronouns that can replace that noun are the ones that they choose, right? So a pronoun is it's a special there we go. It's a special type of noun. It's not one of the 9 parts of speech. It's a subcategory of noun. So noun is the type of speech, and a pronoun is a special kind of a noun. So every noun has an antecedent, right? And so the noun that the pronoun stands in place for, that's your antecedent, right? So, and we'll see why this becomes important. My favorite hockey team is the Montreal Canadiens. The Montreal Canadiens, that, it ends in an S. We use a plural for them, okay? Because it's like an organization, but we're talking about the team, right? So the Montreal Canadiens picked their new team captain. And so the word there is a pronoun, and it refers back to this proper noun, Montreal Canadiens. Montreal Canadiens is a proper noun. Proper noun is another subcategory of noun. And proper nouns are specific people, places, or things, and they're always capitalized, right? Always capital M, capital C. So we could say the Montreal Canadiens picked the Montreal Canadiens' new team captain, which gets really repetitive. And that's why pronouns were invented. And like all language, they weren't invented in a laboratory. They weren't invented in classrooms. These things come about because this is the way people speak to each other. And pronouns are really important because they let you say things quicker and they make you less repetitive. So instead of saying the Montreal Canadiens picked the Montreal Canadiens' new captain, we simply replace Montreal Canadiens with their. But you have to use the right pronoun. Here's another example. So Robin Doolittle is a reporter for the Globe and Mail. She wrote a book called Crazy Town about Rob Ford. So sometimes the antecedent and the pronoun will exist in the same sentence. Sometimes you'll have sentence number 1 and then sentence number 2. But if you're reading that sentence in a textbook or an article or a website or a tweet or whatever, you know that she refers back to Robin Doolittle. It's the same person. And you know that through context, okay? So the writer doesn't say, and by she, I refer back to Robin Doolittle, which would be kind of pointless. But as a reader, as a listener of the English language, you know that she is standing in place for Robin Doolittle. Robin Doolittle is my antecedent. Ante means before. Antecedent, right? And she is my pronoun. Here's an example from my life. My sister Tanya and her daughter Paige are visiting me this Christmas. I hope they. So look at that. The word they is actually standing in place for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 words, right? So that's really useful, right? So I could say my sister Tanya and her daughter Paige are visiting me this Christmas. I really hope my sister Tanya and her daughter Paige bring lots of presents with them, right? So it gets really repetitive and really redundant if you have to keep repeating yourself. So the word they is so we have singular, we've got singular pronouns, and we've got plural pronouns. And it's pretty simple. Spelling the word plural, right? So I need singular pronouns to refer back to singular nouns, and I need plural pronouns to refer back to plural nouns. My sister Tanya and her daughter Paige is a noun phrase, but it's referring to 2 different people, namely my sister and her daughter, right? So I have to use the word they. So the pronoun we use must be consistent or agree with the antecedent, right? So if it's a singular pronoun, it's got to be referring back to a singular antecedent. So this is wrong. This is how we don't do things. I hope she is bringing lots of presents with them, okay? So she does not work with them, right? Them is plural. She is singular. See how that works? The pronoun she cannot work with them, right? So it uses the wrong pronoun, okay? So that doesn't work, right? So these 2 words are in conflict with each other. They've got to be consistent, okay? The word is, it works, right? The word is works with she. But we'll see in a second how we can make that work. So we need to use the plural pronoun they. I hope they are bringing lots of presents with them. So they and them, they basically mean the same thing, but it depends on where they are in the sentence, right? So you wouldn't say, I hope they bring lots of presents with they. Just sounds wrong, right? A lot of these rules, you don't know why they're wrong. You just know they just sound off when you say them. But, you know, they've got to make sense. So they and are make sense too. So we have, and we'll get to that in a second, right? So again, we have singular verbs. Verbs also come in singular and plural form, right? Right? So the verb that we use must also be consistent or agree with the antecedent. So we can say, you know, I am teaching, which is correct. That's good. But you would not say, I are teaching. And just say that, I are teaching. It sounds like, it just sounds wrong, right? That's incorrect, right? You don't say, I are teaching. I am teaching. Am is a singular verb. Are is a plural verb, right? They are teaching, right? That makes sense. So I hope they is bringing lots of presents with them. That's wrong, right? So is a singular verb. They is a plural pronoun. These two don't like each other. They don't work together. We need to use the plural verb. I hope they are. They is a plural pronoun. Are is a plural, you know, they like each other. They are equivalent. And that's how that works, okay? Whoops, I'm knocking things over in my studio here. So, I should have mentioned this at the start, but all of that stuff right there is touched on a little bit in your course material, but not in that great of detail. I just think it's important for you to go into detail and to learn these things. This stuff is in your course material, and I want to spend the next 15 minutes going over it, okay? So directly stated information. This is information we find in the text. So directly stated means it's in the text. I can go to page 15 of Jimmy Comes Home, and I can read about something, and it's in the text. Directly stated information, it can't be argued. It's either in the text or it isn't. There's no argument, there's no opinion. But we use directly stated information to support our arguments. So you and I can read the same book, and you and I can have different opinions on it, but we have to agree that this is the text. And a question that asks for directly stated information will often contain words like this, like find, list, locate, identify, tell, right? So find an example. List all the offenses Jimmy has committed. Locate the chapter where Jimmy. Identify the persons Jimmy cares about the most. Tell the difference between, right? So there's usually a right and a wrong answer for things like this. Now, indirectly, remember, that is a suffix. A suffix comes at the start of a word. The suffix in usually means the opposite, right? So if direct information is stuff that's in the text, indirect is going to be the opposite. It's stuff that's not, well, it's not in the text, like it's not printed. There's no printed words. But this is what we call reading. Very important concept, reading between the lines. Now, it wouldn't be any fun to read a book or watch a movie where they explain everything to you. And when they said, oh, this scene's important because this, or it's important for readers of a book and for an audience of a movie to figure out things on their own. And any good movie, any good joke, right? You know, like if somebody explains a joke to you, it's not funny anymore. And why isn't it funny? Because you didn't figure it out yourself. So when somebody tells a joke, there's usually a part in there where you got to figure it out yourself. And when you figure it out yourself, that's part of the joke, right? So that's when we read between the lines. So the information is not directly stated by the author. We have to use, well, I spelled that word wrong. We have to use our own words when using this information to support our arguments. So we have to use what we believe is true to be about the text. So we read between the lines, and this is when you're making an opinion, right? And indirectly stated information will often be like, you know, try to predict what will happen, use some clues. So sometimes it may not actually say that, but when they say based on what you know about Jimmy, that's basically saying take some clues that you have and then make a jump, right? Think about. Review the passages where Jimmy's grandmother is talking to him. What do we know? I've only read the book once. I don't think we learn about Jimmy's grandma's life. Like, we don't know if she grew up in Green Star Lake. We don't know a lot about her life. But if we look at every interaction that Jimmy has with his grandmother, we can learn a lot about her, right? So that's when it's indirectly stated. The author doesn't tell us about Jimmy's grandma in detail, but what can we learn about her by what words, how she talks to Jimmy and things like that. The third example is when you make connections. And when we make connections, we are creating information by connecting our personal experiences and ideas to the information that we find in the text. We must use our own words when using this information to support our arguments, or what we believe is true about the text. So a question that's asking you to make connections will often contain these words or phrasing. What do you think about? What do you do in your opinion, right? So you, and your. It's talking about you. You are being asked to connect information, to connect your own thoughts, beliefs, and experiences with the text in a meaningful way. So in a meaningful way. And I would argue, in my opinion, you may disagree, but this is why we read fiction. We read fiction because we want to make connections in our own life with somebody else's life, with somebody else's story, right? So when you make connections, and you can make connections with other books, right? Other texts or movies, right? Whatever, other texts, movies, songs, art, poetry, right? Paintings, whatever, right? So a good book, a good story is going to make you think about other really cool stuff in your life, right? So you're making connections to help you understand it, okay? Want to talk about when you answer these questions, how you do that, okay? So when we're studying literature, when we're studying a text, we have to incorporate the text into our own words to answer a question. In my first example, I've got in chapter 1, we learn that Jimmy recently committed 3 break-ins and also has several assault and drinking offenses. So I've used the quotation mark right here. Everything in the quotation mark is how it appears in the text, in the book. Several assault and drinking offenses. But as you see, how I've written it is you can read that sentence as one complete sentence. I've incorporated, and when we incorporate, we include something. So I've included the text into my writing. But I've put, it's really important to have that quotation mark because that quotation mark is saying, these are not my words. These are from page 1. Example 2. Jimmy is tempted to return to his old ways by visiting, quote, an abandoned trapper's cabin 3 miles from the community. So I put the words from the novel in a quotation mark, and I tell the reader where they can find it. Another way to do that is to set the text up as a separate quote, so not as part of my complete sentence. So in chapter 1, we learn that in addition to breaking into the band office, Jimmy has a criminal record. And there we go. There's our colon, right? I've hopefully used the colon correctly right here, right? I've hopefully used that thing as I've taught my students how to use it, right? So I'm setting up a quote, and my quote is several assault and drinking offenses from page 1. Alternatively, we could say, when Jimmy returns to his community, comma, there should be a comma there, a group of children asks Jimmy a difficult question. Here's the question. Are you going to stay here or go away again, Jimmy? So the first quotation mark tells me this is from the book. The single quotation mark tells me it's a quote from the book, so I know it gets a little bit complicated, but it's almost like having brackets within brackets, right? The double quotation marks tell me it's in the book, and the single quotation marks tell me it's a quote from within the book. So it's a quote within a quote. So it gets a little bit tricky, and we'll go into this in detail later, but that's the basics of how you do it, okay? All right, we got a solid 10 minutes here to talk about the assignments, all right? So assignment 6 of Jimmy Comes Home says, think about the title and write at least 3 sentences to predict what will happen in the story. I want you to write in full sentences here, okay? No point form, full sentences, grammatically correct, subject, object, verb, everything spelled correctly, right? So now this is really important, okay? I've been marking several assignments from students in this course, and a lot of people are missing this step, okay? So you need to tell me what kind of information is the question asking for. Does it want directly stated information? Does it want indirectly stated information? Is it asking you to make connections? So have a look at that. Think about the title and write at least 3 sentences to predict what will happen in the story, okay? So you're not quoting the title, and you're not making connections with the title, so I won't actually say it, but by using the process of elimination, which of these 3 options is it asking you to do? The word predict, that is your giveaway, all right? Question 2 says, what do you think about the title? And does it suggest any connections to your own life? Okay, there's that. So what are we doing here, right? When the question is saying, what do you think about this? What does it mean to you in your life? You should know which of these 3 it's asking you to do, okay? So come up with 3 questions you have about the plot of the novel you are about to read. And the great thing about this question is there's no wrong answers. All I'm asking you to do is to come up with 3 questions you have about the novel. And as long as those questions are grammatically correct, guess what? You get full marks. So there's no right or wrong answer here. You just need to make up 3 questions. So you know the book's called Jimmy Comes Home. You know? What do you think? And if your prediction's wrong, it doesn't matter. All you're doing is looking at something and making a guess, all right? Now you look at the novel over and you jot down your opinions, your thoughts about the following. The length of the novel, the organization of the novel. Now, when we talk about the length of a novel, we're talking about page count, all right? How a novel is organized is usually the chapters. You could talk about how long the chapters are. You could talk about how the chapters are titled. The level of language, words used in the novel. Now, level of language refers to the audience of the book. Who is this book? And, I mean, like, it's not necessarily, you know, like, who is it actually written for, but what level, who could understand this book, right? Like, would you have to be in high school to understand this? Would you need, you know, like a grade 7 education to read this book? Could my 9-year-old son read it? You know, that kind of thing, right? So there's lots of books that can be understood by a 10-year-old, but somebody in their 30s is going to love it, right? Level of language is, you know, I would say, you know, we're talking about the reading level. Or sometimes for this, you might want to talk about a grade. Like every newspaper in Canada and North America and most parts around the world, they're supposed to be written at like a grade 8 level. So when journalists are writing in newspapers, they are supposed to write at around a grade 8 level, because the purpose of the newspaper is to spread information. It's not to show off how smart you are, right? It's like you need to be understood by the masses, right? So And we're going to spend the next 5 minutes, and we'll come back to this tomorrow. We're talking about the rap-rock method for answering questions. So restate using words from the question and answer. Answer the question. So you restate the question and then you answer it. So R is restate. A stands for answer. Prove. Use ideas and examples from the text to support your answer. Now, when we prove and we use examples from the text, that's when we quote the text. That is when we are quoting the text. So P stands for prove. R stands for relate. Make connections to yourself, other text, the world. Now, you don't have to use all 6 when you answer one question. It's going to be hard to do. You're going to use some of them, 2 of them, 1 of them, right? You're not going to use all 6. You might, but usually you're not going to use all 6. So prove, relate. So see if we can memorize this thing. We've got restate, answer, prove, relate, and then we have opinion, explain what you think and why, and conclude. Wrap it up with a good ending. All right? So you're always going to conclude it, right? So that's going to be a common element no matter what you do. So let's just, with our last couple of minutes here, let's just look at assignment 7, okay? So if the assignment poses the following question to you, where did Jimmy spend the last 18 months of his life and why? So remember, this is a 2-part question. You don't just simply tell me where he spent his last 18 months. You got to tell me why he went there. So when we restate that, we're going to say Jimmy spent the last 18 months in blank because, right? Because he ... So I've restated the question. So that's R, rap rock. I'm going to answer that question. So by, and then so that's going to be restating and answering. And if I tell them why he spent his last 18 months in jail, I'm going to be using I'm probably going to use a quote from the text. I'm not going to be making connections with myself for this question, so relate is not really needed here. But I'm going to prove it, and I'm going to go to the text, and I'm going to go to the text that says where Jimmy was, and then so I need to support where he was, and I have to support why he was there. So I'm going to prove it, and then I'm going to give my opinion on it. I'm going to explain what I think and why. So I'm going to say, and that's the because, right? So Jimmy spent the last 18 months in blank because he, right? Once I fill in these 2 blanks, where he was and why he was there, I've answered question 1, part 1 of assignment 7, using the rap rock method, okay? I have restated the question. I've answered the question. I have proven why I'm right because I'm quoting the text directly, and I'm giving my opinion on this. It's going to be a pretty easy opinion to justify, especially if I quote the novel directly. And I may or may not have a conclusion, right? So sometimes your words just speak for themselves, and you don't need to offer like a big conclusion at the end. But sometimes you do. We're going to stop there for today, and we're going to come back to this tomorrow, and we're going to finish off assignment 7, 8, and hopefully touch on assignment 9. So thanks for tuning in, and we will see you tomorrow.